Hi there, it's wee Lynn. Just wanted to invite you over for a cup of tea and a chat about the latest episode of Inside Number 9. Would you believe we're now halfway through Series 9 already? If you've just moved into the area, nice to meet you, and don't forget to subscribe on the way out. If you've been here before, would you mind getting that Tupperware back to me sometime soon? No rush, just it's been a while, so whenever you find a minute. And could I have it back clean this time if that's not too much to ask? Sorry, just channeling my inner Sheila. As you probably know, this week's episode was based on the typical nosy neighbours of suburbia and the mystery of what goes on behind closed doors. Mulberry Close also gives us another quirky number 9 gimmick, this time telling most of its story through a video doorbell. And for the most part, it's impossible to tell whether there's actually something sinister afoot, or whether we're just a bunch of curtain twitchers who watch far too much true crime and are hungry for some local drama. This episode could have been called Outside Number 9, come to think of it, seeing as we're looking outside rather than in. Those of you who've been watching the show for a while might remember the episode Cold Comfort from Series 2, which told a story through CCTV footage of a call centre. The suspense works here in a similar way, where your eye is drawn to every moving detail, and because the camera is static, you get that feeling that you can't move away. I guess a good comparison would be Hitchcock's Rear Window, which I'll admit I haven't seen, although I did see the Simpsons episode that parodied the idea, so I think I've got the gist. Or I'm just an uncultured swine, take your pick. Anyway, the door cam view is a fun concept that really plays with your mind. When you're that invested in watching someone else's comings and goings, you start to wonder what dark things they're really up to, and how you might catch them out with some amateur detective work. But who do we go to first? The police or Netflix? The episode also acknowledges the growing fascination with true crime and the comments you often get from neighbours of criminals. You know, oh, we didn't suspect a thing, he just seemed like a nice normal bloke. Bit quiet though. Loved his gardening, always out with the shovel, day and night. By contrast, some of the most innocuous of details start to look pretty suspicious once you start putting them all together, whether you imagine you're living next door to swingers, Satanists, or serial killers. And while it can be fun thinking about the crazy secret lives of the ordinary people around you, there comes a time where you might be better off stepping away from the window and getting on with your life. But then again, what if there is a killer on your doorstep? I mean, they've got to live next to someone. What would you do? What should you do? This concept was ripe for a great piece of storytelling, twist or no twist, and a great bit of dark comedy based on the type of people you've probably encountered at some point in your life. I'm just glad I don't live across from Ken and Sheila at number 8. Cauliflower quiche. I mean, what were they thinking? I'm sure we've all been put off quiche since Series 8 in the last weekend, and I'm not even sure that cauliflower is traditional. But while they'd be annoying as hell in your neighbourhood, these were two great comedic characters and the last ones you'd want involved in your own business. Also on the street is Larry, who Psychoville fans might remember as the children's entertainer Mr. Jolly. That's Jolly, not Jelly, although it was fun to see the two of them together again. Larry is almost never seen without his beloved dog Popcorn, and right away we have a strong contender for my coveted Best Doggo Award for Series 9. Rounding off the cast are Vinette Robinson as Val, a nice ordinary person surrounded by a suburban freak show, and Damon, played by Reece, who gets progressively more annoyed with everyone around him until delivering one of the best and most emphatic uses of the phrase "fuck off" I've heard in ages. Same energy as the mayor of Royston Vasey now that I think about it. As I always say, Angry Reece is the best Reece, especially when he's been petty, and this time he's hilarious. I mean, this is the kind of comedy him and Steve have always excelled at, from the local shop to the Denton household, and the weirder and darker it gets, the better. Now, I was surprised to see some mixed reviews on this episode, with some criticisms of the ending. We'll be discussing that in just a moment, but I'll make sure to give you a spoiler warning before I do. And some were saying that the plot was too thin and that the episode was over-reliant on the doorbell cam gimmick. I have to say, I completely disagree. I loved this episode, and I think it would have been great even with traditional camera work. It's just that the doorbell cam was a brilliant touch and a more inventive way to tell it. I feel that it added to the suspense, plus there were a few moments on the night cam, including one in particular, that I found genuinely frightening. For a second I thought we were seeing some eerily quiet start to The Purge. I think it's the stillness and silence in those parts that make them extra creepy and suspenseful. A bit like the first Paranormal Activity film, where the slightest movement can send you right over the edge. So as well as the clever gimmick, funny line deliveries and brilliant acting, I thought the script was a masterclass in setup and payoff. If you haven't seen it yet, make sure you pay attention because there's almost no throwaway dialogue or detail, and it all comes together in the end, just maybe not the way you'd expect. So if you're not here for the spoilers, then I'll love you and leave you. Just don't forget to put the blue bin out tomorrow night, and that grass is looking a bit long if you don't mind me saying. Thank you, and I'll see you here next week for my review of Control-Alt-Escape, which sounds like a recipe for a number 9 if ever I heard one. Right, so spoilers, where do I start with these? First of all, justice for Popcorn. That episode went and done him dirty. I had a horrible feeling when I saw Larry out looking for him, having myself been the distressed person in the neighbourhood, running around with an empty dog leash in one hand and a pack of Pedigree Chum Tasty Minis in the other. So that was my worst nightmare realised. Incidentally, my own dog Zorro was curled up beside me while I watched the episode, as he does now, and it was adorable seeing his ears pop up every time the doorbell went on the telly. Forget Ken and Sheila, he's the worst curtain twitcher I've ever known, and we've now got smudge marks on our front window from where he keeps pressing his nose up against the glass. So yeah, that ending was nasty, no arguments there. But I thought it still worked within the black comedy tone that number 9 is so famous for, and I got such a big laugh out of the Netflix intro and the Michael Ball gag that it didn't put me off at all. And oh, what a delightfully messy turn of events that was. Damon going apeshit and threatening Larry right before the dog goes missing, Sheila's terrible driving and her attempt to hide the evidence, mild-mannered Larry turning all John Wick after looking in the bin, all going back to that first reference to poisoning foxes and using a brick to keep the lid on. Val, who we thought had been murdered, was then actually murdered, and her husband, who turned out to be innocent, almost took the blame. Almost. But hey, that Ring doorbell just paid for itself. Now, I've seen some people argue that Larry's actions were too far-fetched and not believable at all. And yes, he did end up killing an innocent person, but did I believe he'd actually do that? Well, yes, because if someone hurt my dog and stuck him in a wheelie bin, then they can fully expect a brick in the face. There's a special hell for dog killers, Sheila, and nothing you say in the winter newsletter is going to change that. I already mentioned the setup and payoff elements, which were great in this episode, but I also like the way you could see the neighbours forming judgments on the new residents almost immediately. You know the type. Humour bypass, no life of their own outside the cul-de-sac, and immediately wary of anyone and anything remotely different, or that doesn't fit their pristine and orderly view of how things should be. You can just picture them in hot fuzz talking about the greater good. And of course, they're only too happy to rattle off all their suspicions about Damon to the police at the end, talking about the audacity of him, hanging up skeletons at Halloween and what have you. By the way, this episode was one of 2 that were first shown at a BFI event, which unfortunately I couldn't get to. Fortunately, the interviews afterwards with Steve, Reece and Adam Tandy have now been uploaded to YouTube, so we've got some interesting commentary on this episode and their reactions to its first screening, along with a Q&A session afterwards. I'll link that below in case anyone fancies a watch. And don't worry, Steve reassures us all that the dog who played Popcorn is alive and well. Anyway, the hair. Sorry, I forgot about it completely when I was recording last week's review. This time I managed to catch it on rewatch as I had a feeling where it might be hiding. And no, it's not hidden among the obscene garden gnomes, which sadly we never got to see, but you can catch it very briefly once the police camera goes inside number 9, so it was just out of sight all along. So what did you think of Mulberry Close? Would you have tried eating that revolting sounding quiche? What was going on with Reece's accent, or was he just supposed to be pissed drunk throughout the whole thing? Let me know in the comments, like and subscribe while you're at it, and ring the bell, that's the YouTube bell, not the doorbell, to hear the next review as soon as it's ready. Till then, keep a close eye on what your neighbours are up to, and I'll see you again next week. Bye for now.